social protection and jobs in the World Bank. And I have a pleasure to welcome you to today's discussion of the current situation related to migration, refugees, and remittances. I think we are ready to start. We have our main presenter and we have our panelists. As you noticed, that we gave a title to the main paper, "A War in a Pandemic." And to my knowledge, it's the first time when we can phrase a dramatic situation in the world in that way. We had a pandemic after the war, but we didn't exactly had a war in the pandemic, or it was not reported like that. And it is like this, and it's a very particular time. Today, in May 2022, our focus is on the consequences of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, how it's impacting not only the region, but the whole world. This event today comes, I think, in a very good time, because just 2 days ago, on May 11th, we published Migration and Development Brief number 36. Many of you would know that we publish those briefs semi-annually. But before coming to my presentation and discussion, let me just share 3 or 4 big points which I'd like to put on the table at the outset. It is obvious that the invasion of Ukraine triggered a large-scale crisis, and it's a humanitarian crisis, refugee crisis, migration crisis, and big global economic crisis. In fact, one of the ways of presenting it is to say that it is an 8F crisis in contrast to 3F crisis, 2008 to 2009, because now we have food, fuel, fertilizers, financial sector, fragility, fright, fiscal, and fees. By fees, I mean the response to the price increases by waiving various fees in many countries, which we monitor on a weekly basis. I must say, though, that the key policy response to what happened, especially the immediate refugee crisis, is a renewed importance of social safety nets. And this is not only humanitarian response, it is also a response in terms of supporting livelihoods on a more sustained way of refugees and of families that host refugees and others affected by the crisis. Another very important aspect of the need to focus policies is reducing the vulnerability of women and children escaping from the war in Ukraine. This is 85–90% of refugees are women and children. And this is in fact because men are forbidden from leaving. But that increases vastly the exposure of individuals to trafficking. And that's why counter-trafficking strategies and work in cooperation with civil society organization is very important. And we need to keep our eyes on second round, medium-term effects. Fertilizers, supply constraints for staples are many factors that we need to keep our eye on. These are war-related, but then they are compounded. They are combined with non-war related aspects, which like floods, like droughts, like the whole climate change agenda. You will be, and then various aspects relate to those other Fs I mentioned, which casting them differently than F, the geopolitical tensions affect adversely investment, trade, and growth. So that I would say that would be not only a second round effect, but a third round effect as well. Against this background, it is interesting to see, and you did see it in the report published 2 days ago, Dilip Rata will talk about it very soon, remittances are extremely resilient, and they are actually playing a key role in supporting families back home. And this is good news among the sea of bad messages. In fact, in 2022, the remittance flows from migrants to low and middle income countries are expected to increase by more than 4%, and that follows an almost record growth of 8.6%, a recovery of 8.6% in 2021, and you will see numbers very, very soon. I think it is extremely important to continue working very hard on facilitating the flow of remittances and reducing remittance costs. These are all SDGs we care about, and they should be a key component of government policies to support the poor and to deal with this dire situation. For today, the plan is as follows. I will first invite Dilip Ratha to present the report. And as many of you know, Dilip is a head of Nomad and he's also a head of our migration and remittances team, and his expertise beside migration and remittances, he also has worked a lot on innovative financing for development, including diaspora bonds, future flow securitization, and country creditworthiness. I am very happy to report to you that we have stellar panelists today, and I am very happy that they agreed to join us. First, we will have Seina Busako, who is the World Bank Director of Strategy and Operations for Latin America and the Caribbean, and has long experience in the World Bank as country director for Central America and economist for Brazil, Jamaica, Bolivia, worked a lot worldwide, quite a lot in LAC. We expect her comments to focus on Latin America. We would like to have this regional approach. And we are also blessed by having Katarzyna Zajdel-Kurowska, who is Executive Director at the World Bank Group, representing Poland, Switzerland, Central Asian countries, as well as Serbia and Montenegro. Serbia, at least, I'm not sure of Montenegro.
Katarzyna. Azerbaijan, not Montenegro.
Azerbaijan, yes, I miss Azerbaijan, indeed. So Katarzyna has long international experience, was an alternate executive director in the World Bank, but also in the International Monetary Fund, was Deputy Minister of Finance in Poland, was the member of the Management Board of National Bank of Poland, which is a central bank in Poland, and worked in the private sector, notably as chief economist for one of the biggest banks in Poland, Citibank Handlowy, where she was responsible for macroeconomic and fixed income research. So the plan is that Dilip first will make a 12 minutes presentation, after which Zainabu and Katarzyna will be invited for 8 minutes comments, after which we open up for discussion, and we need to wrap up in 1 hour since the moment we started. With that, let me invite Dilip to make a presentation. Dilip, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michal. It's great to see everyone that I can see, and it's great that many of you are there. So the report, as Michal mentioned, was launched 2 days ago, and it is posted on the nomad.org website, and a typeset version should be posted today itself. So let me share a screen so that I can show you some data and figures to back up whatever I'm going to say. And I wanted to highlight that this report comes at a time a week before, or the weekend before, the International Migration Review Forum that is taking place. It's a very important event from the viewpoint of global governance of migration. And I will highlight a couple of messages that come out from the report. So the first message is that I just want to, okay. So first message is that as Michal mentioned, remittance flows to low and middle income countries are expected to reach $630 billion in 2022, in this year. And if you exclude China from the list of low and middle income countries, then remittances are larger now than the sum of foreign direct investment and ODA combined. The interesting data this year is that Mexico has grown, the remittances to Mexico have grown, and Mexico now is the second largest remittance recipient in the developing world after India, and it has sort of surpassed China. And if you look at the recent trends last few years, then remittance flows to China are falling. And in fact, there are other countries in the top list like Philippines, Egypt, Pakistan, Bangladesh. Particularly Egypt, Pakistan, Bangladesh, there is a very sharp increase in remittance flows, much sharper, double-digit kind sort of increases that you see. And then, of course, Ukraine has crept into the top 10 remittance recipients. However, if you look at remittances as a share of GDP, then it is Lebanon taking the top place now in terms of dependence on remittances. Again, underscoring the fact that when countries are in difficulty, whether it is Ukraine or Lebanon, remittances actually increase because migrants send more money home. And that is that essence of the willingness to support families, intra-family support, that actually is the main factor behind the observation that remittances are a lifeline to large number of households, large number of poor people, and low and middle income countries. The growth during the crisis, 2020, 2021, the COVID-19 crisis, in Latin America and the Caribbean region, growth in remittance flows was really surprising. It was beyond comprehension. And that was largely because of the fact that migrants from Latin America and Caribbean, most of them are, 95% are actually in the United States alone. I think it's actually very unusual in that sense in terms of concentration. And because of the US economy, particularly the fiscal stimulus programs that came into place fairly quickly in 2020, that actually was inclusive directly and indirectly of migrants, migrant workers. And every dollar that the migrant workers received or migrants received, they actually sent probably quite a bit of that back home, where it carries a value for the family in terms of buying necessities, supporting them, even including healthcare. The other interesting part, by contrast, is that in Europe and Central Asia region, remittance flows did not rise as much. And indeed, in 2022, this year, remittance flows to Europe and Central Asia region are expected to fall a little bit, to register actually a negative growth rate. And the main driver for that is, of course, Ukraine, and the other one is Russia. So on Ukraine, remittance flows in 2021 were about $18 billion. And we expect that to rise up to $22 billion. Remittance flows to Ukraine were $18 billion last year. That's like more than 3 times the size of foreign direct investment that went into Ukraine. And we expect that to grow. The reason for that is that compared to 5 years ago, the dependence of Ukraine on remittances, remittances coming from Russia, the dependence on Russia has gone down compared to 5 years ago. Indeed, the importance of Poland as a source of remittances has increased. This is 2021 data before the Ukraine invasion of Ukraine. Now that we have more than 6 million people already from Ukraine, out of Ukraine, they have moved, and about half of them, more than half of them, are actually in Poland. Again, remittance flows in general will increase, but also particularly from Poland, they will increase even further. The other country that is very important for the ECA picture, Europe and Central Asia remittance flows picture, is Russia, where outward remittances tend to be very highly correlated with oil price. It's an oil economy, Russian economy. And given the difficulties now in terms of economic activity, sanctions and all that, and the war, we expect economic activity in Russia to decline, to weaken, and that would impact employment of migrant workers from particularly Central Asian countries like Kyrgyz Republic, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and other countries. So interesting question is, if oil prices are high, we know that they are high now, will that keep remittances up? And that is one question. The other is that remittances from Russia to Central Asian countries flow in ruble terms. And what would happen to the ruble dollar rate, as you know, that weekend and that came back up now. So that determines the dollar valuation of the remittances received by Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan and Tajikistan and other Central Asian countries. So an interesting phenomenon there is that in the past, ruble dollar exchange rate was very highly correlated with oil prices, but that has decoupled now. That correlation is broken now. And interestingly, that has been broken since January 2021. Wow, okay. So with that, we expect the ruble dollar rate to remain weak going forward. And what that means is that every dollar that is sent to Tajikistan, let's say, actually accounts for less proportionately in terms of dollars. So those are the two reasons why we expect remittance flows to Central Asian countries to fall. So Ukraine, we expect a 22% increase in remittance flows in 2022. And in Kyrgyz Republic, a drop of 32%. In Tajikistan, a drop of 22%. In Uzbekistan, a drop of 21%. Overall effect, negative. Now, there is an interesting question. By now, 6 million refugees, migrants have left Ukraine. About 14% of Ukraine's population. And there is a question, is it going to stop or is it going to increase? And it's quite likely, if you compare with recent episodes of large movements of refugees, that actually the number of refugees and migrants from Ukraine are likely to grow even more. So what are some of the government policy responses? Supporting migrants, Ukrainian migrants and refugees, supporting migrants and refugees who are stranded in Ukraine. That is important. And as Michal pointed out, given the strange situation, not strange, but perhaps understandable situation, but it is unique situation of the war, that men are not sort of encouraged or prevented even from migrating. Most of the people migrating are women and children, and that increases the risks of trafficking. So that is an important area that needs attention, protection of migrants and refugees from trafficking. And then there is the issue of supporting returning migrants. This is because of the COVID-19 crisis and whatever that might imply in terms of employment of foreign-born workers all over the world, including anti-immigrant sentiment and all that. So supporting return migrants, coming back to the origin countries in terms of access to training, jobs, credit for business investment, that also remains a policy priority. Now, Ukraine crisis is a bit different in that sense. If you compare that with COVID-19 crisis and even prior to that, the 2009 global financial crisis, that luckily Ukrainian migrants have near universal access to job and social benefits. And there is the gender dimension that also distinguishes the Ukrainian migrants. So then in terms of short-term policy responses to the crisis, supporting remittance infrastructure is very important. So if Ukraine has crisis and people can't go to the bank or ATM machines are not working, power isn't there, or if you go out, then you get short, then ensuring some kind of access to cash is very important during a crisis. Cash is king during a crisis. So it must be access to cash, access to remittance services must be a priority during a crisis. And then, of course, the question of access to bank accounts for migrants and for money transfer companies, that remains a medium-term policy imperative. So with that, couple of points on remittance costs. The global average remittance cost, according to the Remittance Prices Worldwide database, it continues to be at around 6%, more than double the SDG target of 3%, and the costs are higher in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, cost of sending money to Ukraine, one would have thought would be very low, but it is not really that low. And reducing remittance costs by even 2 percentage points will save Ukrainian migrants $400 million per year, right, on a volume of $22 billion. So that is an important point to keep in mind. Now, in terms of implications for global governance of migration of the twin crisis, so we have a war within a crisis, within a pandemic. It is interesting to note that the current global governance mechanism for migration and refugee flows is sort of focusing on, out of 6 elements, it is only on two elements. So international economic migrants are covered by Global Compact on Migration. Refugees are covered by Global Compact on Refugees. And then internal migrants, IDPs, internally displaced persons are left out. Climate-driven migrants are also left out. So there is that thing about really expanding the scope of global governance of migration beyond the narrow focus that we have. And then it is very clear that the Ukraine crisis has strengthened the case for providing concessional financing and other sorts of help to host countries that are experiencing large influx of migrants and refugees. And of course, origin countries that are experiencing large-scale return migration also need support. So there is a very, very strong case now. And perhaps the political climate is just about right to think about creating a concessional financing facility for migration to complement the existing global concessional financing facility for refugees. Now, with the sanctions that were imposed on Russia through the SWIFT payment system, the credibility of international payment system has been undermined. Nobody is talking about it, but I think it is important to bear in mind that the world in the future is going to become more fragmented in terms of the financial system's interoperability, and it would become multipolar because every country now will probably think about a national security dimension to depending on the, let's say, central bank digital currency of a foreign country or payment system of a foreign country controlled by a foreign country. So we should expect a multipolar payment system, but that also means that the friction in the international payment systems will go up, and foreign exchange spreads are not going to go away. And remittance cost, the progress we made in reducing remittance cost, there is a risk that they will not fall any further. Again, to reiterate that if we reduce remittance cost by 2 percentage points, on a volume of $630 billion flowing to low and middle income countries, that 2 percentage point reduction would amount to nearly $12 billion a year. Aid going to Africa in a given year is around $35 billion. So that's sort of the perspective that one should take. In this process, of course, unbanked people would still be left out unless a social impact entity steps in and thinks about creative solutions for retail customers. So with that, the three key messages, I will let you read and I'll stop here. Thank you, Mikhal.
Thank you very much, Dilip. And let's move immediately to our panelists. Let's start with Seinabu. Seinabu, the floor is yours. You have 8 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mikhal, and thank you, Dilip. I feel like I should have spoken after Katarzyna just because of the preeminence of what is happening, what is on top of our mind from the Ukraine situation. But let me take the second story, which is the story about the Latin America and Caribbean region. First off, I really want to get back to this context setting and talk about the importance of the historical importance of both migration and remittances, but also the recent development that have a little bit sharpened or shifted a little the storyline that we knew. You know, migration and remittances are front and center, both for economic and also humanitarian reasons. Latin America and Caribbean region has the second largest internally displaced population from the Venezuela crisis. 6 million we are talking about, and 8 out of 10 are still in the region looking for a place. And this has been going on for several years. So this is putting it in proportion that have become structural in the economy. And we are seeing at the same time a confluence of several crises that are going on. I talked about the Venezuela exodus, but also for years, I think since the 30s, a situation of mixed migration with Central America, with many of the countries in Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, going towards the US, exporting low skills in the US model, who in turn sent remittances. And that has gotten to proportion where you have 20% of GDP as the size of remittances. So this is at a level that is not seen, I think, almost in many other places. And that has been compounded by vulnerable population movement, which are mixing refugees, asylum seeker, forcibly displaced, and also at times unaccompanied minor or specific demographics. To that, you add the whole Asian situation. We don't talk enough about that, but recently we had the assassination of the president, which has worsened an already existing crisis, and alarming numbers are passing through the Darien Gap towards the US or other places. And you add to that Latin America as a transit from people coming from Asia and Africa through the southern part and crossing the whole continent towards the US. So all this also has been paired with enormous flows of financing, often for household and for consumption, but not always, because the region is also known as a very informal region, which means that those flows have been also source of working capital or investment in many cases. But having the country depend on that big source in their balance of payment and other things. For instance, I'm just giving the example of 2020 for the Dominican Republic. 8.3 billion were sent out to about 400,000 Dominican during the pandemic. So they've also served this role of counter-cyclical tool. When there is a crisis, people send. Even when the sending people who are in the US, there is a crisis, they will do an effort. That's what Dilip was saying as unexplained. So people will send and support, which makes it a little bit sometimes hard to define which way it's going. So I wanted to talk a little bit about a few comments on the report with regard to remittance flows and migration flows, and with regard also to Latin America. The first thing is that we are really facing lots of uncertainty going forward. I had mentioned a confluence of crises. You add to that not just COVID, but the impact of the fuel prices, which is fueling at this point core inflation. You're seeing lots of inflation that little by little will get into food inflation. Right now, we are talking about in many countries over 10% inflation going, which is eroding a little bit people's access, not just to consumption, but also to producer goods. So that means that the medium term is pretty unclear. And also the fact that this is linked with the situation in the US, where we're starting to increase the interest rate to tame inflation, and the balance of making sure that that doesn't put the economy in a recession, which might affect the people sending money in their countries. So that is paired with the fact that we all know that employment is at record high in the US, less than 2% unemployment, which means that going forward, we don't know which one of the different aspects will play out and what does it mean for remittances to Latin America. We also, second, make the point that inflation will erode a big part of those remittances. When inflation is at 10%, it's going to eat a big part of those $1 billion we're talking about. And the fact that inflation can also act in a region that has been socially very vulnerable, as the spark it like a tinderbox for social concern, for violence, and for food security. And all those will add up to also climate displacement, because many of these countries are also very vulnerable to climate change. So those add to the worry of what will happen to those flows, how will they be exacerbated, and how will they interact also with the global situation and what is happening in Europe. Last point on the report is really a deep dive on the use of remittances. As mentioned earlier, consumption is often what we think, but because of the interface with the production in the informal sector, it's a much more complex and nuanced story out there. In terms of comments on the migration flow, just to recognize a little bit the changing dynamic and the changing nature that we're seeing in this migration flow, with new demographics, with people moving not just as single adult, but family unit and unaccompanied migrants, and an overlay of both the economic migrant with forced displacement, with refugee, with asylum seeker, muddying a little bit the water and complicating a little bit the classification of those flows and where they're going. Finally, saying that there's lots of violence that is laid out there, especially to women and to children, and lots of trafficking that is ongoing in this place. One focus region is the Darien Gap between Colombia all the way to Panama, where we are seeing fast increasing flows of people and traffickers that are going. And going forward, the need to really check what is happening there and what those movements mean for future flow of people. Just one couple of points before I close. I just wanted to look at the way forward in terms of policy challenges and where we're going. Dilip was mentioning really an increased focus on either transit or destination countries in terms of their policies to receive migrants or return migrants, and thinking about their access to social services, like Colombia has done recently by really doing a 10-year temporary protective status and helping those migrants contribute and be part of the growth of their country and generate through that economic growth and revenues. So how can the bank in that context really bring that social aspect, that integration and economic aspect, and make sure that we are supporting the countries when they're thinking about data, for instance, about policies to make sure that access to education services, to health services, but just legality is provided. How do we make sure that also we can shed a light on the whole part on the violence, on the social inclusion aspect of that? So we've been doing that also in partnership. There are several avenues in that work and partner. There's a GPG. There's also several technical assistance access that we've used from the Global Concessional Facility financing, the GCFF, from the Global Public Good Fund, which have helped us either do TA or top up some of the funds that have been used to really get in that job. And finally, convening power. So let me stop there and take it back to Michal so that we can hear more about the Ukraine story.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Zainabu. I actually do not regret our decision to ask you to speak first, because historically, the preeminence of migration and remittances in Latin America and the Caribbean precedes the one in ECA, even though the one in ECA is dramatic nowadays. So I think you set an excellent platform for what Katarzyna will be talking about. And let me now move directly to her. Kasia, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Michal, for having me and inviting me for this event. And Dilip, thank you very much for this important report and for your earlier engagements with our office, as this analysis is extremely important to our constituency. Michal, you listed countries that I represent. We follow all this research from different angles, the remittances flows, the impact on economies, on development, but also recently from huge inflow of refugees from Ukraine as a result of the Russians' invasion in Ukraine. And I'm also glad that I had such a great speaker ahead of me that set the stage about migration, because indeed the situation now in Europe is unprecedented. This is the largest wave of migration since the Second World War, and also policy responses are a little bit different, and because the situation itself is a little bit unique, given that this is driven by the sovereign crisis, I mean by the war. This is not driven by economic situation, not by climate, not by other issues. This is just driven by a war. And also, Michal, you have mentioned that the majority of or maybe Dilip mentioned that the majority of migrants that are fleeing the country are...
We both mentioned that.
are women, children, and elderly people. So, this is a different type of migration that we observe in other regions, like in LAC or MENA. The numbers are really scary. You have already mentioned that more than 6 million people left country. 10 million of citizens of Ukraine are internally displaced. So this is a huge and unprecedented situation in the center of Europe. And this has global implications. This not has only implications on the neighboring countries, on the host countries or the countries of the destination, because some of them are transiting to other countries. Also, European Union has a reallocation mechanism. So many migrants from Ukraine, they can freely go to other countries in European Union, but also other non-European Union, countries, but European countries, but also to US. So there is definitely help, but what is also unique in that migration wave so far, because this is already 2 months since the war started, that there are no refugee camps built. So this is very unique, and this is completely different situation as in other countries that we observed. And also it might create a little bit different policy responses and also social implications. So far in Poland, we have 3 million of refugees, mainly in big cities. Only in Warsaw, every fifth person now speaks Ukrainian language. So this is like almost 20% of the population of the largest city, the capital city of Poland. But those people, you don't see them on the street. They are accommodated to the private houses. People open their hearts and homes. They welcome refugees, and they still host them. I have many friends back in Poland that they tell me stories about how they live now under one roof with the refugees from Ukraine. They call it no refugees, they call it friends from Ukraine, which is quite nice. And many of them, they are helping each other. I mean, also Ukrainians, they don't want to be a burden. They want to help and support families that they are also organizing already in different social groups to help other people, other Ukrainians, other refugees that are coming and flooding to country. This is completely different story that we saw in other waves of migrants and refugees. Well, this has of course enormous implications on public or state or the general public finance, because all those refugees, they have free access to the labor market, to the education, and also to the health system, so they can register it easily. They when they go to the registration office, they receive the number, let's say the ID number that they can register themselves to get access to services. So there are no restrictions to work, and many of them are really working. So also we might say that the good news of that migration is that they will also positively contribute to the economic growth in Poland and other neighboring countries and hosting countries, as the part of the as the Europe is aging. They might somehow feel also the demographic gap in our countries. Of course, this would be rather long-term or medium to long-term effect rather than short-term. But this would be also positive. They also bring savings. They also they support consumption. They also receive support from the government. They receive the cash from different institutions, but also from the state. So they can also function normally if we can say, at least given the circumstances. So this is the situation in Poland, and the bank is instrumental to support all neighboring and hosting countries. Already Moldova and Romania will get support from the bank for the budget support to provide support to migrants. Bank is also supporting Poland in terms of research, analytical support, but also offered financing to support migrants. But I would like also comment on the much global implications, because the entire situation will have not only local, I mean the ECA implication, this will have global implication. That I will go beyond the presentation, which was excellent, but the number speaks by itself. You could see the numbers of, you could see implication of remittances on the economic growth in many countries in ECA, many countries from this constituency, Kyrgyz Republic, Tajikistan, with impact of 35% on GDP. So if we will see the slowdown or the lower value of remittances, this will have definitely impact on the economic growth in those countries. Maybe Uzbekistan is a little bit less affected, or Azerbaijan, but definitely those two countries, Kyrgyz Republic and Tajikistan, will be hit hard. And also bank is working with authorities to provide support. These are two IDA countries, so those programs of IDA would be somehow redirect to support them as the gap of remittances might be widening. But there are also other implications given the war in in Ukraine and Russia, which are the largest providers of grain to Africa, to the world. We already have noted a huge price increase of food, but also of the energy prices. Many European countries, but not only, are dependent on oil and gas from Russia and from Ukraine, as this is the channeling country that provides this resources to other European and other countries. And we already see huge implication in terms of higher commodity prices and energy prices. So this would have a negative implication on, of course, we see it in inflation, but we will see going forward on lower demand, because this would increase the price of the basic needs and services. So there are a lot of positives, but definitely much more negative implications of the war. We are closely monitoring the situation regarding the impact and the flow of remittances for the countries that you have covered in your presentation. But definitely we are closely monitoring the situation of refugees in Europe, and strong support for the neighboring and the host countries is really needed. And the very last sentence I would like to add, because yesterday we had excellent discussion at the board on the new on the concept note of the new WDR report, which is focused on migration and remittances, which is extremely timely, and I'm so glad that we are having this knowledge and this analytical work done in that unprecedented situation, because it would be extremely important for the strong policy recommendations, but also based on the evidence evidence-based policy recommendations that we will provide them to support our membership in this crisis situation. As I mentioned, different waves of migration has its own characteristics. I described this wave, which is different than others, but of course this is the only beginning, and we will see how the situation develops going forward. Back to you, Michał.
Thank you very much, Kasia. And two comments on my side. One, I just couldn't resist this reflection when you spoke about the impressions of Ukrainian refugees in Poland, that that you have a particular vantage point, given that, if I may reveal, that your family comes from southeastern Poland, in fact, very close to the Ukrainian border. So which is yet another dimension of the whole process of them migrating or seeking refuge in Poland and then going across Poland, mainly to big cities. So thank you for that. And thank you also for reminding me about the board yesterday, which I witnessed with pleasure and satisfaction. And I was happy also to read the comments from the board as encouraging the team to actually do more work on both remittances and internal displacement, because those two areas are really figure prominently in the effects of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. With that, we have less than 15 minutes for very short comments or questions, and I would to encourage those. Please raise your hands either electronically, there is one raised already, or turn on your camera and raise your physical hand. In both cases, I would honor that. I ask you for really short comments given the time, so that we can come back to Dilip at the end. I see Sonia's hand. Sonia, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much. Just 3 comments, because Senibu has done a very good report on the Latin America. Just to emphasize that, and in the report we cannot put everything, but I'm very pleased that the bank is taking now into consideration all the flow, and you say the change of the demographic. We have been putting this measure for a long time, that migrant, refugee, asylum seekers, all of them is fluid. But finally, I think the WDR is taking, and it's not separate. You have to see, when we put the first box of unaccompanied children on the Migration Development Report of 2015, they vetted it. They didn't want it even we mentioned in the report, so now it's here. So that's one. Transit migration, Nomad is working on transit migration, so you will see an analytical report, not only Latin America, Darien Gap is one of the areas, but all over, Niger, we have those parts. And finally, in terms of the crisis, Dile hasn't explained, but he has a very nice propose to all of you, look at the difference of the different crises. That's catharsis. You say different ways of migrants is different. Those ways translate in different ways of diaspora and the kinds of contributions. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see other hands raised, so let me give you a few seconds to change your mind and decide, or you may also choose just to speak. So I give you time to reflect, and my plan then would be to actually come back, if there are no other comments, I plan to come back to Dilip for his reaction, and then depending on the time, we may ask our panelists also to say a closing word. Anybody would like to ask a question or make a comment or an observation on anything related to the topic? If not, yes, I see Robert. No, Manas. It's Manas. Manas strategy. Manas, go ahead. Manas, we cannot hear you because you are muted. Which I know how hard this skill is to
yes,
master.
I think I'm very much impressed by the Nomad. The Dilip is my longtime friend, you know, and I very follow all the things which Nomad does. One thing I just want to mention in this session is that we spoke a lot about this US, Russia and Ukraine, but I'm also interested in the question of the COVID-19 and its impact on remittance. That's something I don't know whether Nomad Group is working on that, especially, because I'm organizing an international meeting on COVID-19. So I'm very much, interested about this, but Nomad has any publications or activities or research, the application of COVID-19 on remittances.
Thank you very much, Manas. The answer is resounding yes to your question, but I will not let Dilip to take all the time explaining how much work has been done on the impact of COVID of remittances, because Nomad team has been working very hard on it. I will allow him to mention that, and then you guys will have a side conversation on that, if I may propose, because a lot of work has been done. In fact, had this report been presented, say, 5 months ago, it would be entirely or predominantly focused on the impact of COVID of remittances, which was extremely interesting pathway with a huge recovery last year, which was not even expected by many of us and many others. Unless I see any other hands raised, and I don't. I would like to come to Dilip for his reaction to what panelists said, and then if we have time, I ask for short closing comments, both Zainabu and Katarzyna. So Dilip, over to you. You also need to master the skill of unmuting. Seems harder than expected. Now you are okay.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to thank Zainabu and Katarzyna and Mikhail yourself and Sonia and Manas as well. On COVID-19 and remittances, we have been following it very closely, and we have been spectacularly wrong about our projection of the impacts. Initially, we thought remittances would decline way back in March, exactly 2 years ago. In fact, it was 2 years and 1 month ago when we released the first, sort of the brief 2020 saying that remittances would probably fall by 20% that year. And guess what? Not only at that time remittances did not fall. Now this brief, we found out that going back, for 2020, many countries have revised the data up. So there wasn't actually a decline at all. There was a small increase, less than 1% increase. So by standards of remittances, it is very small. It's almost like a fall because, think about 18% growth in remittance flows to Mexico last year, right? Or the latest month. So the surprise was remittances were way more resilient than we thought. And that was because of migrants' willingness to help and all that. And so we have documented that. We saw another interesting fact that there was a flow initially away from cash to digital channels. And quickly that ran out of steam because then quickly you get into the problem of unbanked people and, you can only do so much. In the end, cash is important. People do like cash. So from small amounts, digital channels increased, but the payments remain dominated by cash. And the progress we made on going digital, becoming more efficient, we thought we could change the world of finance. And then came the Ukraine, crisis and the sanctions against Russia through SWIFT. That is going to have major repercussions. And if I may say so, I fear that the repercussions will be similar on payment systems as the repercussion of September 11 on payment systems, on small payments. It's a huge impact. And that means that progress on digital adoption on remittance flows, money transfers will actually change. It is going back. And yesterday, I received a message from PayPal that they are increasing fees. So maximum fee to send money within the US was $10. Now it is $25. PayPal, right? So this is what is coming. Then on Ukraine, I want to mention one thing. We saw during COVID-19 crisis that new migration stopped, return migration increased, so net migration became negative, and international stock of migrants fell for 2 years consecutively, 2020 and 2021, with large number of migration and refugees moving from Ukraine. That has been reversed. So the new number of migrant stock in the world looks like it will be about 286 million and rising. So this is a different trend than before. And that, of course, poses an interesting risk for the future that in the global governance of migration, attention has shifted back to Europe and attention has shifted back again to refugees. And in that context, and this is also true about also what we do with the WDR and our mainstream work in the World Bank, there is a tendency, it is very likely that we will go for a band-aid solution and say that let's now expand the global compact on refugees to include vulnerable migrants, people fleeing kind of thing, fleers, right? That would be a band-aid solution. Because if you look at the medium term, we are looking at more than 300 million people, close to 400 million people joining the working age population in Africa and Asia in the next 10 years. So the migration flow, what we see now is going to grow like crazy. It will be economic migrants, and we cannot have only band-aid solutions. So that, I think, is the important message. And let me stop there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dilip. And I think your last point is extremely important, that in the long run, it is critical to recognize that the dominant factor for movement of people across borders worldwide and also within countries is economic migration, not forced displacement. And also that economic migration is good for development. This makes it very different than the tragedy of forced displacement and the need to accommodate forced migrants. So as much as in the short run, looking at them together comes out of necessity, they need to be distinguished in international and national policy making in the long run. This is sort of my reading on the point you just made. I would like now to come back to Seinabu and Katarzyna for 1 minute closing comments and reflections and reactions. So Seinabu, if you would like to share with us anything you have on your mind.
First of all, to really thank Dilip and the whole NOMAD team. They've been partnered with the Latin America and Caribbean region as we started thinking and working on some of these issues. And second, to say that I'm really glad that we are getting to the point where we have a WDR on migration, because then it really brings it back as a central issue of development. And whether we're talking about refugees, whether we are talking about forced displaced people, whether we're talking about economic migrant, asylum seeker, all the different things, it's a very complex and multi-layered issue. And it's important to have an integrative framework where we're not just driven for the short term or from specific aspect of it, but looking at it as part of everything we do if our mission is really to get into inequality and to get into extreme poverty. The second point is that we are heading towards even more complex time in this multitude of things. We are very concerned about the medium term, about food security. Michael mentioned the whole discussion that is going on looking at the impact of social protection system. But that means that all these crises are compounded and the most vulnerable will suffer the brunt of it. So let's continue to really deepen, sharpen this focus and not basically censor ourselves. I really appreciated the point Sonia was making. We did a report a few years back in Central America, and we were so afraid of US policy on migration or saying anything that we can that report. But as we get this work in the limelight and making it a development issue, I'm hopeful that we can really be more helpful and play our role fully. So I'll stop there. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Seinabu, and Kasia, over to you for your closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Michał. This discussion is not only timely because of the current situation that we observe and we are worried about, but it perfectly fits to the twin goals of this institution, because this is so linked with the poverty fight and shared prosperity. So I'm glad that we are having this conversation at that time, and that we are deepening our experience based on the previous waves and building on policy recommendations. Countries that I represent, they are seeking strong policy advices, what they can do, what should be done based on the previous waves, how they should respond, how they should be prepared, how they should behave, which are the key issues that they should focus their policy making on. But you also, Dilip, mentioned extremely important topic that is also close to the heart, which is the cost of the remittances and the issue of the corresponding banking. This has been already discussed on different forums, but definitely this is something that should be also followed and deepened in our analysis at the bank, because as you rightly said, this can save a lot of resources which are so extremely needed for the development. Thank you very much for everything you have done so far, and we will be supporting and looking forward to the further analysis, and of course to the WDR report.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank Dilip, Katarzyna, and Seinabu for their participation. I would like to make two remarks in closing. One is to let you know that at the top moment we had 83 participants here, 63 here in WebEx, and 20 on Zoom. And several representatives from executive directors' offices with us. Thank you very much for joining, and please pass on the messages you heard today to your constituencies. It is very, very important. And the second thing and last thing I wanted to say is to just note that in the invitation you received, you should go to the very end of the invitation when there is a short commercial on our side that next week is the International Migration Review Forum taking place in New York. And then there are several side events, and you may find a link to those side events in the very last part of the invitation you received for this event. So please browse through those events and join those that are of your interest. With that, again, big thanks to everybody who joined us. We are on time. We need to close, and I would like to wish you a very good rest of the day as well as very good weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.